it's Mindy Tate, CEO of Franklin Amara, and welcome to our latest edition of our podcast, Front Porch Conversations. And I'm excited to be sitting here with Rod Heller. We're sitting in 1799, the restaurant at the Harpeth Hotel, but more descriptively, what are we sitting in, Rod?
We're inside a whiskey barrel, a motif inspired by our interior designer of such a symbol of Tennessee.
And the spot we're sitting in is where the ice would drop down and the whiskey would splash, right?
Exactly.
That would be great. So this is a special place. Normally we do sit on someone's front porch, but the Harpeth Hotel is becoming the front porch of Franklin, isn't it?
Well, you're nice to say that. We would certainly like to think that. Our excellent manager of the hotel, Justin Foster, actually hoped when he first came here that this would become the living room. And I think front porch for Tennessee is even more descriptive.
It is more descriptive for the Southerners here, but it's not just the hotel, it's the whole block. It's the Harpeth and what you've created in this, what some people call the River District, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So tell about this property, this idea of building a hotel and apartments in downtown Franklin.
Well, one of the things that I would stress is, interestingly, this represents an important component of Franklin's history, not only reflecting what obviously we hope the Harpeth Hotel and its environs will become, but also this was a critical location at the time of the Battle of Franklin, which in many ways is the critical historical event that occurred here. Because the battle took place on November 30th of 1864, because as the Union Army moved north, they had to stop here in downtown Franklin because all the bridges were out and they had 800 wagons congregated almost exactly on this spot. You can imagine 800 wagons on a November 30th day and just waiting for the bridges to be reconstructed so they can move across. And in the interim, Confederates attacked, and we had this maelstrom of the Battle of Franklin. So to me, this has always been an important historical site, and the decision to go forward with development in part occurred because what was here before we developed it was, in the words of Margaret Martin, historically important alderman, a mess. There were blank slabs of concrete, several buildings and the like. I am not a professional developer. My background is law and business, but the business has only been in part in real estate and finance. And I kept asking various friends and acquaintances here why no one was developing what was obviously an important block. It was the northernmost of the 16 historic blocks here, immediately adjacent to the Harpeth River, which was an underutilized resource, and with Franklin having great potential. And so it seemed natural that this area would be developed. And the answer always was too difficult. There was 13 lots on this block. Various people had tried to accumulate lots unsuccessfully. Plus, Franklin had perhaps deserved reputation for being exceptionally careful in its economic development and the like, and it was felt that it would be too difficult to pull this together. So after several years, when we visited from D.C. and kept seeing little development here or little progress here, finally decided, well, we'll try it ourselves. And Kay and I bought the first lot in September of 2012 and ultimately acquired 9 lots in this block and then a lot across the street to ensure a base for the Harpeth project. From the beginning, it was clear that a hotel would be an integral part, because my sense in talking to friends here is that everybody in Franklin basically wanted a downtown hotel. But the discussion had always centered on a limited service hotel, a Hampton Inn, and I rejected that idea, feeling that Franklin, with its future, required a much higher end hotel.
As you said, you're not a developer, but you have a background in law. But reading your background, it's very interesting. It's international business as well as starting something. You like a challenge, right?
Yes, exactly. I like to do different things.
And Franklin's held a special place in your heart. You're not a native, but some would say you got here as soon as you could, but you've been coming for many, many years, right? What's your attachment to Franklin and Middle Tennessee?
Well, it all, as so often is the case with most of us, comes from my mother. My mother was born in Spring Hill, but her family was basically in Franklin, and she loved this part of the world. And although she lived in D.C. area and the like for most of her life, her heart was always here. And my two young brothers and I spent all our summers here until I was 15 in Columbia. And 3 months in a wonderful southern town then imprinted itself on you quite fully. So I've always loved Middle Tennessee. I never thought of living here, though, until we got involved in historic preservation.
And when you say involved in historic preservation, you're an early supporter and founder of the Civil War Trust, and understanding the importance. Why does Franklin matter when you think about Franklin and its place in history?
Well, I think all of us need a sense of attachment to what has occurred before to understand not only where we are, but where we're going. We're obviously, in the view of many, in an age where history is to some degree forgotten, and where we don't pay as much attention as perhaps we should to the historical antecedents that has made this such a great country. Franklin represents, in many ways, the best and the worst of American history, because frontier town, which saw the growth of an entrepreneurial spirit, success, people developing a sense of democracy. At the same time, we have obviously the slavery and its legacy. We had the treatment of Native Americans, and worst of all, we had a Battle of Franklin, which defined in many ways the aspects of the Civil War which we remember. So Franklin, to me, is almost unique, a town that is beautiful and a tourist attraction for its own, but also historically important. The only city that even comes close to me, or town, is Alexandria, Virginia,
Wow.
which is also a lovely small town, less small than it used to be, and one that reflects the continued components of our nation's history.
What was the pull? What was the final thing that brought you and Kay back home to Franklin, or to establish your home? Because you do have other places you spend parts of the year and live, and as I said, you've traveled the world extensively, both for business and pleasure. But what was the thing that brought you back to Franklin?
Well, I don't know that I can say there's any one event, but the trigger for our involvement here was historic preservation. As you will remember, perhaps, or at least be aware, in 1996, the golf course of Franklin sold its land, 110 acres of what is now the eastern flank, to a developer. And somewhat to the golf club's surprise, but no one else's, the developer in 2002 decided to develop the golf course and put 140 townhouses there. We were vaguely aware of this, but the specter of 140 townhouses next to the McGavick family cemetery, the Confederate cemetery, which would obscure the importance of Carnton, gave the community great concern, and me great concern. So a number of leaders, some from Nashville, like Warner Bass and Jeannie Nelson, more here, Mary Pierce, Robert Hicks, Julian Bibb, others were concerned about this. And I met one afternoon with Jeannie Nelson, whom we'd known in D.C. and was then head of the Land Trust of Tennessee, and Warner and Robert. Robert Hicks was the instigator of the whole approach. He was a driver behind the whole idea of historic preservation of land here. And he asked if we would support an effort to prevent the development from occurring on that golf course. And I said, of course, but the proposal you offered that we put up some mortgage money would not work. I have had a lot of experience in historical preservation and development. I said, you need a white knight, someone who would buy the whole thing. Obviously, once I said that, the die was cast, and nobody else stepped up, and 6 or so months later, bought the golf course, 110 acres, with the intention of preserving it. And that led to our ultimate work here, never again expecting to live here. But then subsequently, an adjacent landowner who owned what we now call Windermere realizing there was somebody from D.C., perhaps a sucker, who would overpay for Tennessee land, he decided to put his land up for sale. And of course, we succumbed again and bought that, partly because it had a house on it. And we envisioned we'd spend some of the year here. But over time, we developed an even greater affection than already for Middle Tennessee. And as much as I love Washington, I'm basically a Washingtonian. I grew up there, practiced law, and went into business there. Much as we love D.C., Franklin had so much intimacy, attracted great people, wonderful friends. We decided just over time, and 5 years after we bought what is now Windermere, we moved here in 2012. And that was the year we started Harpeth.
And so you have a connection to Windermere, but also to Carnton itself as a descendant of the McGavick family. So talk a little bit about that, living that close to your descendants and your history.
Well, it's certainly meaningful. My grandmother was Hattie McGavick, who grew up at Carnton, but she had no great sense of historic preservation. Carnton, interestingly to her, was that old house. And I don't think she ever fully understood those who sought preservation. She very much lived in the present. And I obviously enjoyed it, in part because of the open space. And I walk all the time. But my interest is broader than just one family. I've always been interested in American history. I write about it. It's my major external interest. And how the South was formed and how different families came here has always intrigued me. And so I'm interested in sort of every one of my forebears who contributed to making the country what it is, and contributed obviously in some indirect way to me.
So you mentioned history is a passion and something you pursue, but you're an author and you've written several books. Tell us a little bit about the books you've written, and then you're also kind of a patron of the arts and books. So tell us a little bit about that.
I have written 3 books. The first is called The Confederacy is on Her Way Up the Spout. It's a collection of Confederate letters. Like most Southerners, I had family that unfortunately owned slaves, but most Southerners did not. Only 1 out of 3 Southern families owned slaves. And the letters were written by 4 soldiers from upcountry South Carolina, all great uncles of mine, all of whom died in the war. And I was always interested why the Southern yeoman farmer, who did not own slaves, never would, went to war and fought so, I think you could say valiantly for the Confederacy, all died. I never got a full answer, I have to say, but the book is unusual. It's the largest collection of family letters from one family. I kept the vernacular and have been contacted by students of the English language as far away as Poland as to what American language was like in the 18th century, because that was the same language that's reflected in the letters. The book's still in print. It's in its 2nd or 3rd edition. The next book I did was just interested. It was the genealogical history of my dad's family, because they were much less known, German immigrants in the middle of the 18th century. And I traced them through. It's not as much a genealogy as, well, what is that? It's a social history. And so I got a better understanding of how each family confronted the crises of its generation. The last book that I published was the most ambitious. It's a biography of Felix Grundy, who was a major political and legal figure, actually in Franklin, the developer of Hensheyville, which the first great subdivision in Middle Tennessee. But Grundy, the book was published by LSU Press. It's also still available in its 2nd edition. Grundy was an important but totally forgotten figure, as most 19th century leaders would be. But I enjoyed that enormously. I like the research as well as the writing. And I continue to write and work. I'm a member of an arcane organization in Washington called the Literary Society of Washington, D.C. It goes back to 1874. There are 40 members, black tie once a month. And you do nothing but listen to papers that members prepared, which are then filed at the Library of Congress. And I've done a number of papers there, and I like doing the research. But most of them reflect Middle Tennessee or the South, because I think this is the most interesting part of the country in terms of historical and cultural importance.
Is Franklin's history being recorded as well as it could be?
I think actually Franklin's history is very well presented, in part because we're so fortunate to have people like Rick Warwick here. Rick is such a marvelous researcher and writer and has done so much to preserve the history of Franklin. I can think of few towns which have history as well presented as Rick has presented it here. Plus there are so many others, Jim Crutchfield, and we have supported a new book on historic Franklin, which is going to be coming out in the next month or two, written by Jay Sheridan with magnificent photographs by Robin Hood. It's going to be a terrific book. It's the first new book on Franklin in the last 20 years. It's going to be, again, Jay, who's a great writer, has discovered a lot of facets of the history that previously had not been explored.
So, to know you a little better, use 5 words to describe yourself, and then maybe explain or expound on those just a bit.
Well, I like perhaps some of your interviewers, I'm not going to respond totally. 5 words, I've always felt that it's almost like a dating app, which I've never been on, and I don't think I could come up with 5 words, because all of us have some characteristics and some degree and others. But I would say that, you said it earlier, I like to do different things. I traveled, I like exploring certain areas in depth, and I like to see whether I can do different things, because I've written history, practiced law, I've had 3 turnaround companies, I developed this new project here, and right now I'm doing a catalog raisonné on Haitian art, so I'm learning a little bit. My wife Kay is a marvelous collector of Haitian art, which has been a collected area of art. It's a marvelous outpouring of artistic creativity by these wonderful people in Haiti who live in a country which is subjected to all sorts of problems, but their vitality and joie de vivre comes through, and art reflects it. So I'm doing a catalog raisonné of one of the first great Haitian artists. I'm learning all about art, which is something new at this time.
So you continue to travel, and you and Kay go different places. What do you tell people about Franklin and why you live here? Because some people who you describe yourself almost as a Washingtonian, but now you're a Franklinite. What do you tell people made you change your residence?
Actually, many people in D.C. couldn't quite understand why we leave D.C. to come live here, and many have visited us. We have a lot of visitors, and they invariably say, "What a marvelous town!" And I say, Kay and I are so happy to be living in a town like Franklin, which in many ways represents the best of America. It's a beautiful town with recognition of the importance of the past, but it deals in a pragmatic way with problems of the future. I think how we have been dealing with racial tensions is admirable. I think we have great pragmatic city leadership, entrepreneurial people, and above all else, kind, caring people. So I think Franklin, I would say, is the best of this country in many ways.
What has changed in Franklin in the last 5 years, and what gives you pause for the future of Franklin?
Well, obviously the thing that has most changed has been the dramatic growth and the arrival of many people from other places who are drawn to Franklin for probably reasons similar to some of ours, the open space, the people, the calm, but they come for other reasons as well, and they are inundating the area, chewing up beautiful rolling land. I believe in open space land, and I hate to see some of the beautiful rolling hills being taken over by. But progress is inevitable, and I think change is going to happen here. So I like the way the city has tried to adjust and accommodate the change in a way that preserves the best of the past. What concerns me, obviously, is can we continue doing that? And equally, I think the country is now divided politically and in some ways culturally. I've lived both in D.C. and here. I've always considered myself right in the middle, a moderate, independent in perspective, and I would like to see Franklin continue to have the pragmatic approach that it's had to problems and deal with problems without a vested position on any particular issue other than the preservation of the best of Franklin. That sort of sounds sort of pompous. I don't intend it to be. But I really, like so many, I'm concerned about the fact that what's happening now is dividing the country rather than uniting it. And I hate to see Franklin in any way become part of that. I'd like it to continue to be a unified place.
Unified, it's very homogenous. The demographics show us, to be a very predominantly Caucasian community. But what about diversity and recognizing that as part of our history, but also part of our future?
Oh, absolutely. The diversity is part of our fabric. This has always been diverse. It's not always been recognized in the way we do it now. And I think Franklin has a way to go. My son married a lovely Chinese gal, so my two youngest grandchildren are part Chinese. And we would like them to live here if possible, but I think they feel California, where they live, is less homogeneous or less homogenized, or however you want to put it. So I would love to see Franklin reflect the best of America, of increased diversity, but keeping the values that I think have historically been associated with this town.
So what the Harpeth has done for downtown Franklin and this end of these 13 lots, as you mentioned, and this whole town block, city block here, it's been amazing. And now that seems to be spreading to the factory. There seems to be attention to the factory. Do you see that as a positive, or do you see that in competition to this block?
No, I'm excited about the factory. We were there last week, and I was just stunned by the change that's coming there, and the aura, a palpable aura of change. We're also great supporters of Studio 10, Kay's on the board, and I'm delighted it's found a home there for at least the foreseeable future. No, I think in a town like Franklin, the factory will augment Harpeth, and Harpeth will augment and contribute to the Franklin, to the factory. And I love the fact that the factory is being developed in a way that reflects the best of preservation. It's already there, and it is 275 or 300,000 square feet. Anywhere else would change far more than this. And what Alan Arender and the Holiday Group is doing, I think, is just wholly admirable.
It's great, and it really will, I think, only extend the feeling that exists in downtown Franklin to that area. And for the residents of the Harpeth Apartments, it's another very walkable access point.
Yeah, and someone asked recently how you must feel very proud about the Harpeth, and how do you feel about it? And my reaction is perhaps a little surprising. Yes, of course I'm very proud of it, and I think we and all those that were involved. I had Steve Bacon and Russ Haynes as my colleagues in developing this, and now co-partners in John Rochford in Nashville and Ed Cooper. But to me, it's past. My view has always been, what is the next project? And I like to have this one, in effect, completed, and let's turn to the next thing. And so that is how I tend to view the Harpeth. I think the Harpeth's going to do very well because of its comparative advantage. And we built this project for the future. Franklin, when I came here, I said, developed this is 100 years. Washington, D.C. has many buildings that were built that last, and I think Steve and Russ and others will attest. We wanted this to be a kind of project so that 50, 100 years from now, people would say they really did it right.
What is the next project?
Well, as you probably are aware, we have founded a group called Franklin Preservation Partners, and we are acquiring, with the final closing on June 30th, approximately 62 acres, a little less, just below Mac Hatcher on both sides of Franklin Road. It's the last undeveloped gateway into Franklin. We've been subject to two efforts to develop townhouses and single-family residences. And to us, the 8 members of our group, it's very important to preserve that land. And so we have we're acquiring the land, and we're going to be offering it to basically the city, the Methodist Church and the city, hoping that the city, its leadership, will step up and enable us to sell it to them at a price which just reflects our costs. We're not seeking to make a dime from this. We are acquiring this, we think, at favorable terms in an inflationary period, and I think it's a unique opportunity for the city to bank land for the future and use it in a way that inure to the benefit of generations to come. A lot of people ask, well, it's so great you've done it, so much, this deal's done, the land's preserved. We hasten to say, no, we bought it to enable the city to preserve it. And so we hope the city will be stepping up and working with us to acquire the land, just at our cost, so we can protect that. That project, I hope, will be completed this year.
Great. So you love the past as a preservationist, but there's preservation for the future, correct? I mean, and that's what Preservation Partners is really looking at with that property.
Indeed, and I think too often preservationists are viewed as anchored in the past. I'm a businessman and lawyer. You build for the future, and you look to your children and grandchildren, and your friends' children and grandchildren. What kind of country are we going to have? And we all obviously want the best. And I think this project's a terrific one, but there are many other great things that could take place. So I'm hopeful to play some small role in doing different things. I like to do different things, this is clear.
Here in your home in Franklin,
Here
right?
in my home in Franklin. We're anchored here. We love living here.
That's great.
It's a wonderful town to live in, wonderful people, great things to do.
So one more question. People are moving here, as we talked about, at a rapid rate. You've got family across the country that visits here. What would be your advice to those that move to Franklin? What's your advice for moving to Franklin and becoming part of the community?
Well, certainly become so. You moved here because you found many things that were attractive in Franklin, beyond the political or tax aspects. I hope that people who move here will participate in all the efforts that are being undertaken by huge numbers of people like Mindy Tate to keep Franklin and make it even a better place to live and to work.
Great. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing that new book with Jay Sheridan and promoting that, and maybe having Jay come talk about the book. So that'd be great.
I think that'd be terrific. I think Jay and Robin have done just a brilliant job in this book.
Thanks so much, and thank you, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day.
Thanks very much.